The concept of resilience has become popular in recent years, especially among disaster and development practitioners and scholars. It has become a buzzword, a fashionable term that has gained the interest of communities, governments, civil society, UN organizations, and even international financing institutions. The UK's Institute for Development Studies has called it the Resilience Renaissance. And in fact, the concept is now integrated in major global development frameworks, such as the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and the New Urban Agenda, among others. In other words, resilience has become an idea in good currency, an idea whose time has come, to borrow the words of American sociologist Donald Schoen. Dito sa Pilipinas, bihira ang usaping disaster risk reduction and management na hindi nakakabit ang salitang resilience. And even in the ongoing debate on the creation of a national agency to handle disasters, to deal with disasters, the emerging proposal is that of a Department of Disaster Resilience, hindi a Department of Disaster Risk Reduction and Management. And since Yolanda happened, interest in the subject has spilled over to the public domain in social media, as people start debating about its value. It's the value of the concept as to a disaster-prone society like the Philippines. So we have even learned to smile about it, laugh about it, through the proliferation of a number of memes related to disasters. But while we talk about resilience extensively in our documents and plans, in meetings and conferences and whatnot, we might be taking it only at face value. We seem to carelessly throw it around in different instances because why not? Mabango siya sa mga funders, sa gobyerno, sa mga NGOs. And sometimes we tend to use DRR and resilience interchangeably, as if one means the other. But they're not. Resilience, you see, is more than just reducing the potential impacts of a disaster before it strikes. It also talks about quick recovery and building back better. So how do we move then from simply preaching about resilience to actually using it as the backbone of our disaster management system? There are many things that we can do, but we can start with making small changes, not just in our DRM planning practices. So first, we can start integrating forgotten and neglected disasters in our DRM planning. These are small, localized disruptions such as recurring floods, water shortage, hours-long blackouts or short-term droughts in some communities that are far from the city center, for example. And normally, these events, we don't categorize or classify or report them as disasters. And these events do not usually have casualties, so they're not newsworthy. However, the regularity of these disruptions can easily compound the everyday hazards of poverty that the poor and the marginalized sectors face on a daily basis. And in our current disaster system, we are setting aside these small incidents, as we tend to attend only to the major ones, the big disasters, like the big one that supposedly threatens Metro Manila. But a study in Colombia has actually shown that over time, small and moderate events can cumulatively outweigh the damage and losses that we incur from major disasters. So if we expect society to be able to bounce back quickly and effectively, we need to strengthen our social safety nets to reduce the everyday risks that limit the coping and recovery capacity of the poor. Second, we need to start planning for failure. We're usually accustomed to planning for success, with the assumption that things will be business as usual when the time comes for us to execute our plans. We even have a popular saying for it, by failing to plan, we are planning to fail, which seems to assume planning is an assurance that we will succeed. But we cannot plan as if we are going to be fully functional or successful all the time. With climate change, success will not be easy. There's the issue of uncertainty. with the changing precipitation and temperature patterns, sea level rise, and the black swan weather events becoming more or less part of what we call as the new normal. We won't always be successful. There will be extreme events like or even worse than Yolanda that will challenge our capacities no matter how hard we prepare. And we need to acknowledge that ultimately we can fail. The moment we accept failure, then that's the moment that we can start asking the hard question. Paano tayo babangon? Right now, mabibilang lang sa daliri ang local governments na merong pre-disaster recovery plan. And this is where the value of anticipatory planning comes in, which can only be possible if we start embracing a probabilistic way of assessing our disaster risks. Our DRM plans must be guided by multiple disaster risk scenarios, not just historical worst-case scenarios of a specific hazard, to show us the full range of potential failures in our DRM systems. Third, we need to actively start planning beyond political boundaries. Currently, our disaster and climate change plans are largely local government-centric. But disasters do not respect political boundaries. Many of the risks that we face are shared by more than one LGU or community. And so therefore, river basin, watershed, or ecosystem-based disaster risk management planning should be encouraged. And for this to happen, the sharing of data, resources, and expertise must be promoted. Interlocal cooperation must likewise be explicitly incorporated in our contingency plans, in our business continuity, service continuity, and even in our pre-disaster recovery plans if we have one. Okay? And this is important to make up for possible reduction in in-situ capacity in times of disaster. And, but it's also useful, not only for response, but even for recovery. And the Metro Manila Development Authority has gotten it right when it assumed that only 30% of NCR's manpower and equipment resources will be immediately available in the event that the big one happens. And so because of that, the augmentation of resources from other LGUs has already been identified under our UPLAN Metro Yacal Plus, our contingency plan for Metro Manila in the event of in light of the big one. But then again, maliban sa UPLAN Yacal, bihira ang LGU na tinitingnan ang posibleng tulong ng ibang LGUs, local governments, at iba pang sektor sa kanilang contingency or recovery plan, kung meron man. No? If you look at the contingency plan of many LGUs in the country, the gap analysis is even based on the assumption that the current resources of an LGU will be at its disposal 100% come disaster time. That is a dangerous mindset, as we have seen in Yolanda, in the recent multiple earthquakes in Mindanao, and in many other recent disasters. The fourth consideration is we need to plan to sell. This means that our disaster and climate change related plans must be marketable. When I say marketable, dapat madali silang maibenta para makakuha ng pondo at makakuha ng suporta sa mga opisyal, local officials, at sa mga tao. This means that our local climate change action plans, for example, must be good enough to pass the requirements set by the Climate Change Commission and the Department of Finance to access the People's Survival Fund. Our local DRRM plans must also be more than just a listing of programs, projects, and activities in an Excel file or worse, a copy of another LGU's plan. Our plans must not settle for business as usual solutions. They must be bold in ambition, but practical and doable in implementation. This means that they must be attractive enough to potential partners, such as NGOs, funders and volunteers that can serve as our force multipliers. For a plan to be marketable, it has to be believable to the people. For this to happen, participatory planning approaches must be supported to strengthen local ownership and socio-political buy-in. Again, this is where good science can come in to augment local understanding of disaster risks and inform the identification, development, and implementation of appropriate community-based interventions, especially nature-based solutions. Lastly, Alongside reducing disaster risks, we need to start thinking about how to prevent the accumulation or creation of new risks. The issue of disaster risk creation is usually the elephant in the room in many DRRM summits, conferences, and meetings. We are heavily invested in DRR, in reducing the negative impacts of disasters, in reducing vulnerability, in increasing capacity, in controlling hazards. Yet we tend to not touch on the source of our problem in the first place, that of the issue of exposure, which is a product of our development choices. I'm talking about people and development assets that we continue to put in harm's way, to place in harm's way. I'm talking about the E in the disaster risk formula that all DRM and climate change practitioners are familiar with. And actually, a study has shown that while we have made significant strides in reducing vulnerability globally, it has not been fast and wide enough to negate increasing exposure and intensive risk accumulation in many urban centers. This means that for as long as we keep on developing our cities haphazardly, we will not stand a chance against the likes of Yolanda, Ondoy, and other major disasters. Habang buhay lang tayo magcha-cha-cha. One step forward, two steps backward. This is to say that disasters must be treated first and foremost as an urban development issue, and therefore our DRM plans must not just be a laundry list of PPAs needed for disaster preparedness. We must confront head-on the role of ill-planned urban-led development in the creation or worsening of disaster risks in our local government units. The Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board's introduction of climate and disaster risk assessment recently in our land use and development planning process is a step in the right direction to address this concern. Preventing the creation of new risks also means taking a closer look at our DRR solutions. Over the years, we have seen some cases where the DRR solution has made matters worse. Isang halimbawa na dyan, ang ginagawa nating pagtaas ng kalsada upang labanan ng baha. Yes, it has been effective, nababawasan naman ang baha sa kalsada, except that ang tubig baha ay napunta na sa mga kabahayan sa gilid ng kalsada. Off-city relocation also needs to be revisited, as it has proven to be ineffective in many cases, both as a DRR and development measure. So all in all, resilience demands that we change the way we approach DRM planning. It requires us not only to minimize the impacts of disasters, but also to strengthen the speed and quality of our capacity to recover. Now, to strengthen our resilience, we need to level up our game and change our mindsets in DRRM planning by 1, integrating neglected disasters, 2, anticipating failures, 3, planning beyond boundaries, 4, developing marketable, not your business as usual interventions, especially nature-based solutions, and lastly, paying particular attention to the creation or accumulation of new risks, especially as we develop our cities and communities.